Hey guys, today let's learn about a surprising and transformative story. It is the account of Callista Ravenwood, a young woman who went through a near-death experience and came back with a powerful mission, something she believes can impact the lives of many. Before we dive into this story, I want to know, what city are you watching from? Leave it in the comments. And if you're not yet subscribed to the channel, take the opportunity to subscribe now and turn on notifications so you don't miss any of our next stories. Now, get ready, because this story will change your perception of the spiritual world. I will never forget that night. December was my favorite month, and the air in Fargo was always thick with the promise of Christmas. I was returning from my younger sister Marianne's school Christmas concert. She played the violin with a delicacy that enchanted everyone, and that night she played my favorite song, Nuate Feliz. On the way back, the wind was blowing hard, making the snow swirl as if it were dancing a ghostly waltz in the darkness. "Slow down, Callista," I repeated to myself, my hands firmly on the steering wheel. I tried to remain calm, but fear lodged in my chest at every turn. My vision was limited to the bright white line of the headlights against the swirling snow that seemed to swallow the car. The road was almost deserted, with few cars trying to weather the storm. As I drove, my mind wandered. I was thinking about the night with Marianne, how she shined on stage and how proud our parents would be if they were there. But no matter how much I tried to focus on the present, something inside me seemed to be alert. It was as if a voice whispered, "Be careful." I felt a chill, a feeling that something was about to happen, something terrible and irrevocable. And then, suddenly, he appeared. A semi-trailer truck came from the opposite direction, and there was no avoiding it. Time seemed to slow down. I tried to avoid it, moving the steering wheel hard to the right, but it all happened too quickly. There was a deafening impact, a sound of metal on metal that seemed to echo across the entire road. I was thrown. I felt my body being crushed, and an indescribable pain took over me. Every part of my body hurt, like it was splitting in half. At that moment, among the broken glass and twisted metal, I thought that this was the end. But even in the midst of the chaos, a strange peace began to spread within me. It was as if I was accepting the reality of what was happening. I felt my body becoming weaker and weaker, the pain becoming distant. There was no more sound around me. The storm, the truck, the road, everything began to disappear, like a fog that dissolves in sunlight. My consciousness detached. I remember floating above the scene, seeing my car destroyed in the snow and the paramedics trying to save me. It was a surreal sight, as if I were a spectator of a film that I couldn't stop watching. I saw the intensity in the paramedics' eyes, their hands working with precision as they fought against time. With every second, the snow fell thicker around us, and it seemed as if the entire world was enveloped in icy silence, watching. I didn't know where I was going, but I wasn't afraid either. It was as if something or someone was calling me back home. The silence that enveloped everything was almost mesmerizing. I floated above the scene of the accident, feeling absolute calm, as if I were disconnected from everything I had ever known. Below me, I saw my own body trapped in the wreckage. The sight was terrifying, but I felt no dread, no pain, just a strange sense of acceptance and mild curiosity. It was like watching someone else's life. From above, I could see the snow piling up around the car, forming a thick white blanket. The darkness of the road and the silence seemed to swallow everything, as if the world was suspended in waiting. The snowstorm raged relentlessly, and all I heard was the muffled sound of hurried footsteps and paramedics, voices echoing in the distance. One of the paramedics, a tall, robust man with a red beard, gestured frantically as he called for other colleagues to help him. "We need more light here. Fast!" he screamed, and soon I saw other paramedics arriving and trying to remove parts of the car to reach me. The snow fell heavily, covering everything, like a curtain that insisted on hiding the scene. They moved quickly and precisely, but there was something in their faces that I had never seen before, a despair that seemed to mix with bitter resignation. From above, it was easy to see the fragility of life. I saw how the paramedics fought against time and the force of nature to save a body that no longer felt like mine. One of the paramedics placed an oxygen mask over my face, and as he monitored my signs, I felt a weightlessness, as if I were being pulled upward, toward something greater, something unknown. As I rose higher, the physical world began to recede. The sounds became quieter, until they disappeared completely. The colors around me began to change. It was as if I were passing through an invisible portal, and the darkness gave way to a light so intense it was almost blinding. The light was blinding, but at the same time, incredibly welcoming, and it enveloped me with a tenderness and peace that I had never felt before. I felt a kind of impulse, a force that was guiding me upward, as if I were being called. It was difficult to describe. It was a pull that came from the center of my soul, a need to keep rising. Below me, the crash scene seemed to fade away, like mist at dawn. The world I knew was slipping away, and with it, everything I once thought was important. The pain, the fear, and even my own identity began to lose meaning. As I climbed, I was overcome by a feeling of weightlessness so complete that it felt like I was becoming part of that light. I knew somehow that I was about to meet something or someone that would change my life forever. There was no doubt, no hesitation, just a peace that seemed to fill every bit of who I was. It was like a door was opening for me, and I knew that once I walked through it, nothing would be the same again. Climbing higher and higher, I was greeted by a vast expanse of colors and lights that seemed to pulse with an energy I had never experienced. It was as if every particle of this new realm had a life of its own, a unique vibration that filled the space around me. I felt weightless, floating in an indescribable tranquility, as if all my worries and fears were behind me, dissolved into the distance. There, peace was complete and profound. As I progressed, I realized that I was passing through layers of a reality that expanded beyond any human understanding. With each layer, the intensity of colors and light increased, and I was enveloped by sensations that seemed beyond the physical. There was distant music, an ethereal sound that seemed to be born of light itself. It was gentle but powerful, and it reverberated through my soul, connecting to something inside me that felt like it had always been there, but that I had never known. Suddenly, I felt a presence approaching. It was something much bigger and vaster than I could understand, and at the same time, intimate and welcoming. It wasn't necessary to see to know that someone was there with me. The presence radiated such deep love and compassion that my soul seemed to melt under the heat of that light. Then he appeared, Jesus. Jesus stood before me, surrounded by a light that seemed alive, a light that was not of this world. His clothes did not seem to be made of fabric, but of pure energy, a light that emanated from within him and that seemed to expand to everything around him. His eyes shone with a mix of compassion, love, and urgency, and when he looked at me, I felt like he knew me completely, as if every detail of my soul was an open book to him. "Callista," he said, his voice soft but carrying an authority that made me shudder. "You were chosen to testify to a truth that the enemy tries to hide. The world is in danger, shrouded in spiritual deceptions that keep souls away from the true light." His every word seemed to resonate in my soul, reaching me on a level that went beyond rational understanding. I wanted to respond, to ask what he meant, but I was so overcome by the intensity of the moment that my voice just wouldn't come out. It was as if he already knew everything I wanted to ask, everything I needed to understand, and was there to guide me in understanding. Jesus continued, explaining that symbols we often consider harmless were actually spiritual tools, weapons of the enemy, as he called them. These symbols, he said, were created to lead souls astray and influence people in ways that few can perceive. They're not just drawings, Callista, they are doors. Spiritual doors that the enemy uses to reach this world. I listened intently, absorbing every word, and as Jesus spoke, a deep understanding began to form within me. There was something urgent in his words, a truth that he wanted me to carry beyond that moment. I felt like my mission was becoming clearer, that the calling to warn others about these dangers was now part of who I was. When he finished, Jesus placed a hand on my shoulder. The light in his hand radiated a warmth that went through my soul, and I felt a peace I had never experienced before. He looked me in the eyes once again and, with the same intensity, said, "Fear not, Callista, you will be guided." The presence of Jesus was so overwhelming that words seemed insufficient to describe what I felt. It was as if all the peace, compassion, and love I had ever known was concentrated in his light, beaming directly into my soul. There, face to face with him, I realized how small I was in the face of such an infinite presence, but at the same time, I felt welcomed, as if I were at home for the first time. Jesus looked deeply at me, and the urgency in his gaze was unmistakable. He seemed to read my every thought, every emotion, as if I were an open book to him. There was no judgment in his eyes, only compassion. I felt completely exposed, but in a way that didn't bring fear. It was a healing kind of exposure. He then started to speak. His voice was serene, soft, but charged with an authority that transcended anything I could understand. "Callista," he began, pronouncing my name as if it were a sacred word. "The world is shrouded in deception. Many have been led to believe that harmless symbols can represent peace, wisdom, protection. But these symbols are disguises, spiritual traps created to divert souls from the true light." Jesus paused, allowing me to absorb his words. I felt a mixture of astonishment and sadness upon hearing that symbols such as the peace sign and the ankh were common, seen in clothing, jewelry, and art. How could something so present and even appreciated have a hidden spiritual impact? Jesus seemed to understand my thoughts as he continued, his tone even more serious. "These symbols work like antennas, Callista. Each is designed to allow a frequency, an influence. They are not just designs or ornaments. They are gateways that the enemy uses to influence the physical and spiritual world. The sign of peace, which many believe to be an emblem of unity, was in fact created to mock faith and to spread spiritual noise that confuses people and creates entry points for demonic influences." His words left me paralyzed. I could never imagine that something like this was possible. Did symbols I saw all the time actually have such a profound and harmful effect? My heart was restless, and a doubt arose within me. Would people be able to understand this truth, or would they consider me crazy for even mentioning it? Jesus noticed my hesitation, and his expression softened. He placed his hand on my shoulder, transmitting a warmth that seemed to dispel all my uncertainties. "I chose you, Callista, because I know that your soul has the strength and courage to carry this truth. It won't be easy, but I will be with you every step of the way. Don't fear the judgment of the world. The true mission is not in being understood, but in being faithful to the purpose." I nodded slowly, taking in the depth of his words. I felt a responsibility I had never felt before, but also an inexplicable peace. It was as if a part of me had been awakened to something that had always been there, waiting to be revealed. And then, as if he could read my soul, Jesus smiled softly and said to me, "You will bring this light to the world, Callista. Teach what I have revealed to you and help others to see beyond appearances." Those words reverberated through me. There was a clarity that took over my spirit, a certainty that the mission he had given me was the purpose for which I had lived until then, even without knowing it. Jesus then began to show me images of people wrapped in these symbols, each of them surrounded by a light shadow, almost imperceptible but constant. It was as if people were trapped by something invisible, something that dimmed their shine. My chest tightened as I realized how deep this deception was and how widely spread it was. I looked at Jesus again, and he reaffirmed, "These symbols are not harmless, they are doors." With that last word, he began to walk away. His robes of light seemed to fade away amid the spiritual realm that surrounded us, but before disappearing, he looked at me one last time and said, "The truth will enlighten those who seek, and you will be the bearer of that light. Never forget, I will be with you." Then he was gone, and the light around me began to fade, as if preparing me for a return. After Jesus disappeared, I felt alone again, floating in the spiritual realm. The peace that still inhabited my spirit was profound, but now it was accompanied by restlessness. I had just received a mission, and the weight of that truth still echoed within me. Jesus. Words resonated, and I knew that my life from now on would never be the same. While I was still absorbing everything he had said, images began to appear around me. It was as if a new layer of reality was revealing itself, a layer where symbols gained life and hidden purpose. Each of them emerged in vivid detail, surrounded by a dark, almost palpable aura. Those symbols that I had always seen as harmless were now revealed in their true nature. The first symbol that appeared was the peace sign, something so common that I didn't even think about it. It floated in front of me, slowly rotating. Suddenly, it began to emit a low sound, a strange and unsettling vibration. It was as if that symbol was pulsing, emitting a frequency that seemed to interfere with my thoughts, almost like an irritating hum. I then understood what Jesus meant by spiritual noise. The energy emanating from the symbol seemed to cause slight mental confusion, a feeling of distraction, as if it was trying to disrupt my focus and clarity. Next I saw the anchor, a symbol I knew was associated with ancient Egypt. He had always considered it a symbol of life and eternity, but Jesus had revealed that its function was much darker. The Ankh appeared glowing a dark, almost metallic color. Around him, the energy felt heavy, dense, as if it formed a barrier. Suddenly, I felt a slight pressure around him, as if there was a strange presence, something that was watching, waiting. I understood that the Ankh, in its function, acted as a spiritual transmitter, channeling energies that seemed connected to a dark and unknown dimension. It was as if he attracted and concentrated forces that interfered with human perception of life and death. Another symbol presented itself before me, the Eye of Horus. This was one of the most popular, present in amulets, jewelry, and even tattoos. For many, the Eye of Horus was a symbol of protection, but I could feel its true function. As I approached him, I felt a slight pain in my forehead, between my eyes, in the pineal gland area. I realized that the Eye of Horus functioned as a kind of spiritual surveillance device, affecting this sensitive region of the human body. It was as if he was monitoring, recording every movement, every thought, creating a connection that made people more vulnerable and subject to external influences. The next symbol was the Ouroboros, the circle formed by a serpent devouring its own tail, representing a closed cycle. Jesus had said that he trapped people in cycles of deception, and as I looked at him, I understood what that meant. Ouroboros rotated slowly, and its shape was mesmerizing, creating an illusion of infinity, as if it were trapping the mind in an endless cycle. I felt an emptiness when I looked at him, a feeling of resignation, of being trapped in a place with no way out. I realized that it represented a subtle prison, keeping people in a state of spiritual apathy, where discernment was limited. And then I saw the horned hand gesture, widely used in concerts and events. It was a symbol that I always associated with fun, something irreverent. But now, seeing it in its spiritual context, it seemed to function like an antenna, transmitting directly into dark dimensions. It vibrated with an energy that seemed to reverberate within me, connecting to something unknown. It was a call, an invocation, and I realized that each time this gesture was made, a spiritual door opened, allowing influences to pass through. Lastly, the pentagram, a symbol used in witchcraft. The energy around him was heavy and cold, and as he spun before me, I felt a sense of repulsion. The pentagram was a mark, a seal of connection with dark forces. Its effect was almost physical. He gave off a vibration that seemed to pull people into an inverted understanding of the world, where good and evil mixed in deadly confusion. As I observed these symbols in their true nature, I understood the magnitude of what Jesus had shown me. These symbols were everywhere, and, because they were disguised as cultural icons, they went unnoticed, connecting people to demonic frequencies without them realizing it. I was overcome with an urgency to destroy any of these symbols I could find, as if my very soul depended on it. I knew I needed to go back and share this truth, but I was afraid of people's reactions. Still, the weight of that revelation and the mission I had been entrusted with were too strong to ignore. These symbols were true portals, and Jesus' urgency in showing me this gave me the courage to face any opposition I would encounter upon my return. After Jesus disappeared, I felt alone again, floating in the spiritual realm. The peace that still inhabited my spirit was profound, but now it was accompanied by restlessness. I had just received a mission, and the weight of that truth still echoed within me. Jesus' words resonated, and I knew that my life from now on would never be the same. While I was still absorbing everything he had said, images began to appear around me. It was as if a new layer of reality was revealing itself, a layer where symbols gained life and hidden purpose. Each of them emerged in vivid detail, surrounded by a dark, almost palpable aura. Those symbols that I had always seen as harmless were now revealed in their true nature. The first symbol that appeared was the peace sign, something so common that I didn't even think about it. It floated in front of me, slowly rotating. Suddenly, it began to emit a low sound, a strange and unsettling vibration. It was as if that symbol was pulsing, emitting a frequency that seemed to interfere with my thoughts, almost like an irritating hum. I then understood what Jesus meant by spiritual noise. The energy emanating from the symbol seemed to cause slight mental confusion, a feeling of distraction, as if it was trying to disrupt my focus and clarity. Next, I saw the Ankh, a symbol I knew was associated with ancient Egypt. He had always considered it a symbol of life and eternity, But Jesus had revealed that its function was much darker. The Ankh appeared glowing a dark, almost metallic color. Around him, the energy felt heavy, dense, as if it formed a barrier. Suddenly, I felt a slight pressure around him, as if there was a strange presence, something that was watching, waiting. I understood that the Ankh, in its function, acted as a spiritual transmitter, channeling energies that seemed connected to a dark and unknown dimension. It was as if he attracted and concentrated forces that interfered with human perception of life and death. Another symbol presented itself before me, the Eye of Horus. This was one of the most popular, present in amulets, jewelry, and even tattoos. For many, the Eye of Horus was a symbol of protection, but I could feel its true function. As I approached him, I felt a slight pain in my forehead, between my eyes, in the pineal gland area. I realized that the Eye of Horus functioned as a kind of spiritual surveillance device, affecting this sensitive region of the human body. It was as if he was monitoring, recording every movement, every thought, creating a connection that made people more vulnerable and subject to external influences. The next symbol was the Ouroboros, the circle formed by a serpent devouring its own tail, representing a closed cycle. Jesus had said that he trapped people in cycles of deception, and as I looked at him, I understood what that meant. Ouroboros rotated slowly, and its shape was mesmerizing, creating an illusion of infinity, as if it were trapping the mind in an endless cycle. I felt an emptiness when I looked at him, a feeling of resignation, of being trapped in a place with no way out. I realized that it represented a subtle prison, keeping people in a state of spiritual apathy, where discernment was limited. And then I saw the horned hand gesture, widely used in concerts and events. It was a symbol that I always associated with fun, something irreverent. But now, seeing it in its spiritual context, it seemed to function like an antenna, transmitting directly into dark dimensions. It vibrated with an energy that seemed to reverberate within me, connecting to something unknown. It was a call, an invocation, and I realized that each time this gesture was made, a spiritual door opened, allowing influences to pass through. Lastly, the pentagram, a symbol used in witchcraft. The energy around him was heavy and cold, and as he spun before me, I felt a sense of repulsion. The pentagram was a mark, a seal of connection with dark forces. Its effect was almost physical. He gave off a vibration that seemed to pull people into an inverted understanding of the world, where good and evil mixed in deadly confusion. As I observed these symbols in their true nature, I understood the magnitude of what Jesus had shown me. These symbols were everywhere, and, because they were disguised as cultural icons, they went unnoticed, connecting people to demonic frequencies without them realizing it. I was overcome with an urgency to destroy any of these symbols I could find, as if my very soul depended on it. I knew I needed to go back and share this truth, but I was afraid of people's reactions. Still, the weight of that revelation and the mission I had been entrusted with were too strong to ignore. These symbols were true portals, and Jesus' urgency in showing me this gave me the courage to face any opposition I would encounter upon my return. As the spiritual realm around me began to fade, the voice of Jesus still echoed in my soul, like a gentle, steady melody. He had been clear. These symbols were not just marks. They were doors that the enemy used to influence and deceive. With the mission he had entrusted to me, I felt a weight mixed with an immense responsibility. I knew that when I returned to the physical world, this truth would transform my life, but I also knew that my commitment to this mission would not be easy to explain or make people understand. Suddenly, I felt a wave of energy envelop my spiritual body, as if it was being taken back to my physical body. As I approached the scene of the accident, my vision began to adjust to the material world, but before I completely lost connection with the spiritual plane, one last message from Jesus resonated in my mind, like a final piece of advice. He instructed me to remove and destroy any symbol in my life that could represent an open spiritual door. These symbols are spiritual bonds, he said. Just like doors, they create connections that keep souls trapped and vulnerable. Get rid of them and help others to do the same. And above all, teach them to close these spiritual doors. Jesus then taught me a specific prayer to break any spiritual bonds created by these symbols and seal the open doors. He told me that each person could free themselves from these influences with a simple act of conscious renunciation, a personal decision to break away from any negative connection. He explained that prayer should be sincere, with a true intention to move away from the influences of the symbols, and that it would serve as a spiritual shield, a wall that the enemy would not be able to cross. The prayer resonated in my mind like an ancient and powerful poem. It was simple, but charged with authority, almost like a code that turned off an invisible circuit in the spiritual world. Jesus explained to me that by saying these words, protection would be activated around the person, cutting any ties that could exist with these deceptive energies. He made me promise that I would teach it to everyone who was ready to listen and understand. As soon as I returned to my body, I felt painful pressure, as if every bone and muscle was rebuilding itself. My mind was confused, switching between the spiritual and physical worlds, but I knew something had changed deep within me. I was no longer the same Callista who had left that road the night of the accident. Now I was a messenger, a witness to spiritual truth, and my mission was clear. My physical recovery was surprisingly quick, something the doctors couldn't explain. But at the same time, every time I closed my eyes, I saw the symbols. I saw the face of Jesus, and I heard his instructions echoing in my mind. The urgency of his message gave me no rest. I constantly reminded myself that there were open spiritual doors in my life and in the lives of many people around me. I returned home, and my first action was to search every corner, every object, every detail. It didn't take me long to find a necklace that my best friend had given me years before, with the Ankh symbol. I had never thought much about him, but now I knew he carried an energy that I could no longer ignore. As I held it, I felt a strange weight, a slight spiritual resistance, as if the object had its own presence. Without hesitation, I took the necklace and placed it in a box along with other symbols and objects that somehow seemed to vibrate with the same energy that Jesus had described. I knew I would have to destroy them, eliminate them completely, so that they would no longer have any influence on me or anyone else. As I placed the box on the floor and prepared to destroy them, I took a deep breath and recited the prayer Jesus had taught me. I felt a wave of warmth and peace around me, as if a blanket of protection was being placed over me. And at that moment, I understood the power of that prayer. It was a shield, a barrier that the enemy could not overcome. My mission was just beginning, and I knew that making people aware of these symbols and helping them remove such influences from their lives would be challenging. Still, with Jesus' prayer in my heart and his words guiding my every step, I felt stronger and more determined than ever. I was ready to get started, even though I knew I would face resistance, doubt, and maybe even ridicule. I knew that the truth he had entrusted to me was a gift, and that by sharing it, I was opening doors to true light in a world surrounded by shadows. When I returned to my body, the pain was almost unbearable. It was as if every bone, every fiber of my being was in shock. Even so, a mysterious force kept me conscious, as if the spirit that now inhabited my body was stronger, more resilient. The doctors were in disbelief at my quick recovery. Miracle was the word I heard repeatedly, as if there was no other explanation for the fact that, after a devastating accident, I was showing signs of improvement day after day. But my transformation went far beyond the physical. The near-death experience had changed something inside me, and I now perceived the world around me with stunning clarity. It was as if a new dimension of reality had been revealed. Colors, sounds, even the energies of the people around me had a clarity I had never experienced before. I felt like something inside me was awakened, a spiritual vision that allowed me to see what had previously been hidden. One afternoon, shortly after I was discharged and returned home, I began to notice details in my surroundings in a different way. The light coming through the window seemed more alive, and the objects around me seemed to emit a kind of energy, a unique signature that I could effortlessly feel. It was strange, but at the same time, it seemed like the most natural thing in the world. That first week at home, I decided to calmly observe everything around me. My eye was drawn to a painting I had hung myself months before, with a drawing of the Eye of Horus. I remember finding the symbol fascinating, a mix of mystery and history, and placing it there as an exotic touch to the decor. But now, with this new perception, he could see something he had never noticed before. The painting seemed to emit a subtle energy, almost imperceptible, but which brought a feeling of restlessness and discomfort. Staring at the painting, I remembered Jesus' words about the Eye of Horus and its power as a spiritual surveillance device. It was as if the painting was observing, radiating an influence that messed with my intuition, affecting my peace of mind. It was a constant reminder that that spiritual door was open. Without hesitation, I removed the painting from the wall and, with a mixture of disgust and urgency, placed it in the object box that was to be destroyed. Every symbol I encountered now seemed charged with invisible intentions, something that caught my attention and at the same time repelled me. With each object I removed, I felt lighter, as if my space was being purified. This wasn't just a physical cleansing, it was a spiritual cleansing, a renewal that made room for something new, something purer and truer. As I continued to search my house, other symbols began to catch my attention. A small ring with the Ankh symbol that I sometimes wore, an old t-shirt with a peace symbol. Everything seemed loaded with a weight that, until that moment, I was unaware of. My family and friends began to notice that something had changed in me. I was more introspective, more observant, and some even mentioned that I looked more bright, as if a new energy was emanating from me. I felt more connected to this mission that Jesus had entrusted to me, and I was determined to keep my home and my life away from any symbol or influence that could compromise this peace. At the end of each day, I recited the prayer that Jesus had taught me, closing all the spiritual doors that might still be open. This ritual was not just a practice, it was a commitment, a daily reminder that I had to stick to my mission, regardless of what people might think or say. Soon I began to realize that this transformation also gave me the ability to feel the energy of the environments I visited and the people I interacted with. It was as if a new layer of perception allowed me to see the impact of symbols on people's lives. In the moments when I interacted with friends or acquaintances, I could sense if they were involved in energies that limited their spiritual discernment, blocking their ability to see the truth. This spiritual insight made me understand the depth of the deception that Jesus had revealed. It wasn't just an aesthetic choice, but a subtle manipulation that ensnared people without them realizing it. I realized that my mission went beyond ridding my own life of these symbols. I had to share this knowledge, to warn people about the danger of these deceptions, even if it meant being ridiculed or rejected. Every day, I felt stronger and more determined. It was as if this new spiritual vision was preparing me for what was to come, for confronting the resistance and skepticism I knew I would face. But most of all, I was at peace. I knew I was not alone, that Jesus was by my side, and that my life now had a clear and unwavering purpose, to bring light to a world that desperately needed it. Once I started sharing my experience, the reaction from those around me was difficult to deal with, to say the least. Initially, I tried talking to my closest friends and family. I wanted them to understand the gravity of what I had learned, to realize that those symbols were more than just drawings. But instead of reception and understanding, I was met with looks of disbelief and shock. Skepticism was written on every face. "Callista," my friend Sarah said, hesitantly, during one of our conversations, "are you sure about all this? I mean, they're just symbols. Don't you think maybe you're reading too much into it?" There was concern in her eyes, but also something else, a mixture of doubt and a little fear, as if she was trying to understand something that was beyond her understanding. I looked at her steadily, trying to find a way to explain everything without sounding fanatical. "Sarah, I understand this is hard to believe," I replied, trying to keep my tone calm. I also thought these symbols were harmless, but during my experience, I saw them. Jesus showed me what they really represent. They are doors, Sarah, connections to something dark, something we don't realize. She shook her head slowly, biting her lip, and looked away. I could see she was confused and maybe even worried about me, but I knew I couldn't back down. It was as if the weight of that truth demanded that I stand firm, even if people couldn't understand it. My family also reacted with skepticism. My father, always rational and practical, tried to dissuade me from talking about these revelations, saying that I was letting my imagination get out of control after the trauma of the accident. "You've been through a lot, Callista. Maybe this is just your mind's way of dealing with everything, don't you think?" I took a deep breath, feeling a mixture of frustration and sadness. They couldn't understand that I wasn't trying to convince them of a fantasy. I was sharing a truth that had been revealed to me so clearly that ignoring it felt like a betrayal of what I had experienced. "Father," I replied, keeping my voice steady, "I know this is hard to accept, but I can't go back. Jesus gave me a mission, and I need to fulfill it." After a few weeks, most of my friends distanced themselves from me. The conversations were now short and sporadic, and I noticed that the word fanatic was starting to circulate around me. As much as it hurt, I realized this was part of my mission. Jesus had shown me that I would need to have courage and stand firm, even in the face of misunderstanding and rejection. However, this situation brought something important to light, a new depth of faith and determination. As much as I wanted understanding and support from those around me, the truth I carried within me was enough. I wasn't alone. I felt the presence of Jesus with me, a sense of constant spiritual support and guidance. It was as if my loneliness was filled with something greater, something that transcended the judgment and skepticism of others. So I started looking for ways to warn people without being so direct, without seeming like I was forcing my experience. I thought I would write about it, share my story in a way that would reach those who were willing to listen. When I started to put the words on paper, I felt a sense of peace, as if I was doing exactly what was asked of me. Every sentence I wrote seemed to resonate with the purpose of my mission. The alert journey was a constant test of patience and resilience. I knew that many people would continue to doubt, but I remained faithful to the truth that had been revealed to me. I understood that silence would be a form of omission, a lack of love for others, because those who did not know the truth deserved to have the chance to choose with knowledge. At a certain point, I met a small group of people who were willing to listen, to understand what I was saying. It was a transformative experience, realizing that my mission was reaching those who were looking for answers. There was hope, after all. I knew I wouldn't change the world overnight, but every little conversation, every person willing to listen, was a victory in my mission. With each step, I was reminded of Jesus' words, "You will be guided." This certainty sustained me and strengthened my faith. I knew that even if I faced criticism, ridicule, or even loneliness, I would continue. After all, my commitment was not to the approval of others, but to the truth that had been entrusted to me. It was my mission, my purpose, and I was prepared to bring the light, even if I had to walk against the tide of misunderstanding and doubt.